I bought a house for my parents with savings I accumulated over 30 years. When I said I and my hubby would live there too, they said, "We gave the deed to your sister's family, so ask your sister." I went to a law firm. When the judgment came out, their reaction made me laugh. The resignation letter I was holding was gleaming white in the morning sun. I had made the decision to leave the insurance company where I had worked for 30 years. The significance of this decision quietly stirred my heart. Is this really okay? As I was organizing my desk, a younger colleague of mine, whose face was filled with concern, approached me. She was a subordinate whom I had cherished since she was a new employee. "Yes, I've made up my mind." I smiled calmly. The 30 years I spent at this company. I remember the day I joined at 22 as if it were yesterday. I joined this company filled with hope. The following 30 years were truly days of tumultuous changes. As the wave of digitization surged, the insurance industry underwent significant transformations. Paper files were replaced by databases, and face-to-face contracts transitioned to online. I adapted to numerous regulatory reforms and overcame the turbulent waves of corporate mergers. Through these processes, I too grew. I shifted from a general position to a comprehensive one, became a team leader, and finally ascended to become the first female sales manager. It was never an easy journey. There were days I worked until late at night, nights I remade documents while shedding tears, and times I fought against discrimination. However, all these experiences shaped who I am today. Many people say it's too early to retire at 52. Certainly, I could have aimed higher in my career, but my heart was already moving towards the next stage. When asked why now, I showed them a photo of my parents, their smiling faces, now in their mid-70s. Behind those smiles, I could clearly see certain things. The way my father's steps were becoming less certain, how my mother's fatigue was deepening day by day. The old family home has become too much of a burden for them. Steep stairs, narrow corridors, and an inconvenient bathroom. All of these were becoming shackles for my aging parents. I'm thinking of remodeling the house. When I conveyed my intention to retire, the president stared into my eyes. "Losing someone as capable as you is a great loss for the company. However, I respect your decision." His words warmed my heart. The time I spent at the company was never wasted. Rather, it has become a significant asset supporting my current decision. With my severance pay, I plan to completely remodel my parents' home and live with them. The house my parents live in was originally built by my grandparents. I own it, having inherited it as an estate, but it was far from my workplace, so my parents were living there. When I discussed the remodeling plans, my husband immediately agreed. He is a mild-mannered engineer who loves my parents as if they were his own. On holidays, he plays chess with my father, and genuinely praises my mother's cooking. His kindness further supported my decision. I want to cherish the time with my parents. I want to make their remaining days as happy as possible. This desire was born from pure love. I will use everything I learned at the company for my family now. My career is moving to a new stage. The estimate for the remodeling work arrived 2 weeks after my retirement. The moment I opened the envelope, I was stunned by the amount, which was much higher than expected. It seems that transforming a 40-year-old wooden house into a modern living space costs more than imagined. As my husband and I reviewed the estimate, we read through each item: foundation work, seismic reinforcement, replacing insulation, making it barrier-free, completely renewing the water facilities. All of these were essential renovations. The architect explained everything carefully. Considering your parents' age, the design should be adaptable for future caregiving. We're planning to widen the corridors, eliminate steps, and consider locations for handrails. Indeed, that was necessary. Even though my parents are healthy now, they might need care someday. We need to prepare thoroughly now for that time. Most of our retirement pay will be used up, won't it? My husband's words made me feel a bit sad. Originally, we thought about using the retirement pay for a trip around the world, but now there's something more important. That's fine. This is an investment in the future of our entire family. The construction began in May. First, we had to clear out all the items in the house. During that time, my parents stayed at our place. We would have breakfast together, my mother would help with dinner preparations, and my father would play chess with my husband while watching TV. Such ordinary daily life inflated my expectations for a new lifestyle. I'm really sorry. It must be such an inconvenience for you. As she spoke, my mother was washing dishes in the kitchen. I embraced her shoulders from behind. "Mom, it's not an inconvenience at all. In fact, I'm happy we can spend this time together." The construction proceeded as planned. Old walls were removed, new pillars were erected, and floors were replaced. Every weekend, we went to check on the progress of the construction. However, there was one thing that concerned me: my brother's behavior. Since the construction began, he had started visiting the site unusually often. Not just on weekends, but I would also see him there on weekday evenings. He would intently look over the blueprints and ask questions to the workers. At first glance, it seemed like the natural behavior of a son concerned about his family home, but something felt off. He has seemed different lately. One day, I decided to bring it up with my mother. Her expression seemed to cloud over for a moment. Well, there are various things going on. She didn't elaborate further, but it was clear that something was happening. I had a chance to meet my brother's wife Kathy, and she also seemed to be hiding something. By the third month, the construction was taking shape. A bright open living room, wide corridors easy to navigate with a wheelchair, and a bathroom with handrails. We planned to set up my parents' bedroom on the first floor and use the second floor for ourselves. "The workmanship is wonderful," said the architect, looking pleased. Indeed, the finish was better than expected, yet somehow a corner of my heart remained uneasy. My brother's behavior, the subtle changes in my parents' demeanor, the words Kathy almost said, "Only 2 more weeks until the house renovation is completed." While my heart swelled with dreams of a new life with my parents, a nagging unease that I was overlooking something important wouldn't leave me. At night, I confided in my husband in our bedroom. "I feel a bit uneasy." He closed his book and looked at me seriously. "I've been concerned too. The recent behavior of your brother. It seems like he's up to something." His words turned my unease into conviction. But surely I wanted to believe my family wouldn't betray me. In August, the remodeling was completed. The architect, satisfied with the final inspection, handed me the keys. "The finish is excellent. I'm sure you'll make wonderful memories here," he said. As I listened to his words, I walked through the newly renovated house. Bright sunlight streamed through the large windows, softly illuminating the white walls. The spacious living room was laid with warm flooring chosen by my parents, and the kitchen was equipped with fixtures thoughtfully designed for my mother's use. Most of our retirement fund had been invested, but it was well worth it. We should be able to move in next weekend. I discussed with my husband as we toured the rooms, talking about our future life. My parents liked the new home, especially my mother, who was looking forward to cooking in the new kitchen. However, this peaceful expectation would crumble in just one day. The next afternoon, when I went to the house for a final check, I saw an unfamiliar large truck parked in front of the house from a distance. As I approached, I realized it was a moving company's truck. "That's strange. Our move isn't scheduled until later." When my husband parked the car on the shoulder, I also noticed my brother's black SUV. A foreboding feeling ran through me. As I walked towards the entrance, passing workers carrying in cardboard boxes, I opened the door to an unexpected scene. My brother's wife, Kathy, was organizing boxes. Unfamiliar furniture was already placed in the living room, and her preferred kitchen tools lined the kitchen. "Oh, Kathy." Kathy noticed me and made a troubled yet slightly defiant expression. Her appearance with a high-end brand bag slung over her shoulder and perfect makeup was like she owned the place. "What is going on here?" My words trailed off as my mother came down the stairs. Her usually gentle eyes now harbored an unfamiliar coldness. "I'm sorry, but they have nowhere else to go." Her voice sounded more like justification than apology. My brother's suspicious behavior, my parents' evasive attitudes, Kathy's half-spoken words, all the pieces fell into a terrifying puzzle. "Wait, this is my house, my retirement fund." "No, that's not right." My mother's voice resonated unusually strongly. "This is our family's home. It's just the two of you. But your brother has children, and besides," she stepped closer and lowered her voice, "you are still young, so you can save up again. Your brother doesn't have that kind of time." At that moment, something inside me froze. The calm I had cultivated over 30 years of corporate life shattered in an instant. My brother descended the stairs and declared with a domineering tone, "It's already decided. Dad and I have settled it." "What do you mean?" Turning around, I saw my father standing with documents in hand. "The transfer of ownership is already complete without your consent." His voice had the coldness of reprimanding subordinates at the company. "But that's illegal. Legalities don't apply to family matters." And my father smirked. "I can prepare your signature anytime I need." At those words, I felt the blood drain from my face. They forged my signature. I couldn't believe they would go that far. "Mother, this is fraud," my husband said quietly yet firmly. "Legally, the owner of this house is shut up." My brother shouted angrily, "You wouldn't understand. I have a responsibility to support my family. I don't have a carefree life like yours." Kathy smirked meaningfully as she took out her smartphone. "I can shoot cooking videos that will look great on Instagram in the new kitchen. My followers will love it." The life I dreamed of with my family was crumbling before my eyes. In its place, a scene filled with arrogance and greed was unfolding. "Get out." My voice was colder than I expected. "Leave this house right now." My mother laughed nervously, trying to smooth things over. Now, don't get so worked up. All of this is for your benefit. For my benefit." I couldn't help but laugh. For 30 years, I've worked desperately at the company. Overtime, working on holidays, promotion exams, I dreamed of a new life with the retirement pay I finally received. But if it's about money. My brother pulled out several $100 bills from his wallet. Isn't this enough? Isn't your feeling worth just this much? His arrogant attitude made me lose my last bit of reason. The movers continued to bring in their belongings indifferently to the family drama unfolding. I took out my mobile phone, my hand trembling. I'm calling the police. My husband put his hand on my shoulder. His warmth was barely keeping me together. Wait. My mother waved her hands frantically. If the neighbors find out about the police, if you cared about the neighbors' eyes, you shouldn't have illegally entered someone else's home in the first place. My father stepped forward and lowered his voice. Think about it. Who should live in this house? You and your husband, or your brother and his family with the grandchildren? Which makes more sense? His words carried the authority of a father who had held sway for years, but that no longer worked on me. Make sense? How does trampling over my life make sense? I took out my mobile phone and dialed 911. Wait, my mother's scream echoed. You are no longer a member of this family. So I finally hear the truth. As I made the call, I stared back at my mother. So this is your true face. As I started to hear the sirens of a police car approaching, the expressions on my family's faces changed. I felt the illusion of 30 years crumbling down with a crash. 2 weeks after the betrayal was uncovered, I spent sleepless nights. Whenever I closed my eyes, the scenes from that day replayed. My parents' words, my brother's shouts, Kathy's challenging expression, and their belongings brought in one after another. It's just a temporary measure. That was what my parents claimed. They said that my brother and his wife were facing a crisis in their marriage and were financially strained. Therefore, they wanted to let them stay temporarily in the new house. However, their behavior did not seem temporary. That's clearly wrong. Megan, my best friend, said with a stern expression as we sat in our usual cafe. She has known me since our days at the insurance company, and she knows everything about my 30-year career and my family relations. It's the retirement pay you worked 30 years for. It's essentially your entire life. Megan's words were sharp, yet they precisely struck my heart. Indeed, that house is not just any building. It represents the culmination of my 30 years of labor and my hope for a new life with my parents. Growing up, our family was never wealthy, but we always had a caring heart for each other. At least, that's what I believed. This isn't about love. Megan gripped my hand tightly. It's a fraud. Your kindness is being exploited. You should take legal action. That night I had a long discussion with my husband. I understand how you feel, he said, holding my shoulder, but if we stay silent, your life will be ruined. Our lives will be ruined. The next morning, I made up my mind. I booked an appointment with Mr. Simpson, a real estate lawyer. His office was located on the 15th floor of a skyscraper in New York City. On the solid wooden desk, records from the past 2 months were spread out chronologically. Let's organize your case, Mr. Simpson said as he adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses, carefully verifying each fact one by one. First, your retirement pay from 30 years of service. What's the exact amount? $320,000. The moment I uttered that number, the weight of 30 years welled up inside me. Overtime, working on holidays, studying for promotions, all my efforts were condensed into that amount. Mr. Simpson pulled a contract from a blue file. The document, signed 3 months ago, was still new, and their unlawful occupation, the illegal residency of your brother's family, plus the forgery of your signature. He calmly analyzed each fact. Having over 30 years of experience as a lawyer, Mr. Simpson himself brought a sense of reassurance. In conclusion, he took off his glasses and looked directly at me. Their claims have no legal basis. Rather, this is a case that could potentially lead to criminal charges for fraudulent behavior. At those words, I involuntarily gasped. Criminal charges against my parents. Yes, attempting to deceive you out of a significant asset like a residence is a clear crime. However, Mr. Simpson continued quietly while looking out the window. Let's keep that as a last resort. First, we aim to resolve this in a civil way. That evening, I received a briefing on the specific legal procedures. The first step was to stop their unjust occupation with a preliminary injunction. Following that was a lawsuit to confirm the ownership of the house. Depending on the situation, we might also consider claims for emotional distress. It will take about 2 weeks to prepare. Document creation, evidence organization, submission to the court. Mr. Simpson chose his words carefully. During that time, is there a chance they might leave voluntarily? I responded with a wry smile. Unlikely. If anything, they'll entrench themselves further, especially my brother. My prediction was spot on. The day after we filed the petition for a preliminary injunction, an infuriated call came from my brother. Are you suing your own family? His voice was trembling. With anger or perhaps fear. If your family, why did you try to take my house? I have a family too. Kids, You wouldn't understand. His words brought all the anger I had harbored for 30 years to the surface. Right. I don't understand. I don't understand trampling over someone else's life. For 30 years, brother, I worked hard and saved that retirement pay, and with it, the life of 30 years I remodeled that house. After hanging up the phone, my hands were shaking. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but there was no turning back. The hearing at the court was set for the September. In the dim courtroom of the New York District Court, I faced my family. My mother was dressed in black, crying throughout. Why would you do something so terrible? My mother appealed to familial affection and occasionally sobbed quietly. My father, sitting upright, emphasized the moral perspective. Parent-child bonds should not be like this. My brother cited financial hardship and brought up his children's future. However, the judge's demeanor was composed throughout the trial. She was a middle-aged female judge who occasionally took notes while methodically advancing the proceedings. I will judge from a legal perspective. At those words, I could feel my family's emotional arguments crumbling one after another. The examination of evidence proceeded swiftly. Records of the pension transfer, the original contract, and numerous threatening messages they had sent. Each piece of evidence was clearly recognized. As October began, we awaited the verdict. Meanwhile, the pressure from my family continued. There were phone calls trying to persuade me from my father's brother. There were letters of criticism from relatives on my mother's side. Rumors were spreading around the neighborhood, and at times, we even received direct threats. If you go on like this, you will regret it, my father's message said, devoid of any previous warmth. Do you intend to leave your family destitute? I never thought you were so heartless. My mother's message on Messenger contained the usual conviction that they were in the right. During the 2 weeks waiting for the verdict, I questioned my decision every night. Even the decisiveness cultivated over 30 years of corporate life sometimes wavered when faced with family issues. But thankfully, my husband was always on my side. Every time he came home from work and saw me troubled, he repeated the same words. You're doing the right thing. Just because they're family, it doesn't mean you have to accept unreasonable demands. That's not love or devotion, it's just abusive control. Then, on the morning of October 15th, I received a call from Mr. Simpson. The verdict has been delivered. His voice conveyed a sure sense of resolution. On my way to his office, the sky was covered with gray clouds, and a cold autumn wind was blowing. As I stepped into the elevator, I took a deep breath. This verdict would forever change the relationship with my family, but perhaps, it was an inevitable conclusion. 3 months after the verdict, in January 2025, I stood on the planned site of my new home in a quiet suburban residential area. A huge land located a 15-minute walk from the station. Nearby, there was a 24-hour supermarket, and a lush park was within walking distance. It looks like we can start a new life here, I murmured as my husband and I surveyed the vacant land. Just then, I noticed a familiar name on my smartphone screen. It was a message from my mother. We need to talk. We can't pay the rent for the public housing we're living in. I sighed. 3 months after being forced to leave, my parents' and brother's living conditions were more dire than I had imagined. They had to live on the 4th floor of a municipal apartment building. The elevator had been out of order and left unfixed, and shopping required a 30-minute walk up a hillside path. My mother had interviewed for a part-time job at a nearby supermarket, but was rejected due to her age. Eventually, she could only manage to earn about $500 a month by distributing flyers. Recently, I heard from a former colleague of my father's that he visited the job center almost daily. However, there are hardly any companies willing to hire someone in their 70s. He was also turned down for a security guard job due to concerns about his physical strength. Messages from my mother kept coming regularly, but eventually stopped when I ignored them. Last week, I saw her by chance at the supermarket. She was rummaging through the discount bin for food close to its expiration date, a stark contrast to her former demeanor. When she spotted me, she quickly disappeared into another aisle. Her cart was piled with discounted food items. About your parents, Megan told me some neighborhood gossip. My parents couldn't live on their pension alone, and were considering applying for welfare. They spend their nights in the dark to save on electricity bills, she said. My brother's downfall was even worse. His divorce from Kathy was finalized, and he was behind on child support payments. He was facing wage garnishment due to multiple credit card debts. Your brother was even fired from his convenience store job. Megan's information network was accurate. Apparently, he had been working the night shift at the register and was fired for being repeatedly late. Unable to find a new job, he was living reclusively at our parents' place. Please, can you lend me just $500? My brother's calls were still mostly about asking for money. His voice was exhausted, and his once arrogant demeanor had faded. We're not in that kind of relationship anymore. When I hung up the phone, something pained me deep inside, but this was the path they had chosen. While looking at the blueprints for the new house, I had many meetings with the architect. A two-story house with 4 individual rooms for international students on the first floor and a shared space. The second floor would be our living space. My husband's proposal for a multicultural exchange type of a shared house opened the door to a new life. The new house was completed in April. Bright sunlight poured into the living room with its warm wooden floors and spacious kitchen. Everything was ready to welcome a new family. 1 month after starting our new life, living with the international students was more fulfilling than I had expected. Anna's Pella, Wang's talks about architecture, Junko's Japanese paintings, and Pedro's entrepreneurial ideas. The dining table was filled with smiles and conversations. New family. I was gradually beginning to understand what that meant. Blood relations do not necessarily guarantee bonds. What matters is the heart that cares for each other. That doesn't necessarily mean always forgiving. Now my home is filled with the smiles of young people. There is the kindness of my husband, and there is new hope. I sometimes think of the hardships faced by my parents and brother, but that is the path they chose, and I am walking my own path. The words "Welcome to our home" displayed at the entrance shine in the morning sun, as if heralding the start of a new season.